Hello everybody, and welcome to my new series on planning and preparation. And here's where I'm going to answer to the question, give the answer to the question is, how do I plan and how do I prepare for a hike? So here's the topics that I'm going to go over. First, I'm going to just mention some overarching rules of thumb that have to do with planning and preparation. And then I'll talk about planning, and those two topics are what I'll go over in this video. In the next video, I'll go over conditioning and exercise, and then finally I'll go over diet. Now, I want to emphasize that especially with conditioning and exercise and with diet, that these are my personal choices. I'm nearly 64 years old. I'm relatively healthy, I believe, but your condition may be different. You may be younger than me, you may be older than me, you may be in better physical condition, not as good physical condition. So when it comes to conditioning and exercise and with diet, you really need, especially if you're going to make a major change, you really need to consult with your doctor, health professional, whoever you use for that sort of advice. So this is just going to be what I do. Okay, so the rules of thumb. First of all, planning is not the same as preparation, and a lot of people confuse these things. You know, the use of spreadsheets to figure things out and to lay out things and say, I'm going to do this many miles on this day and I'm going to be here on that day. That's not the same as preparing for a hike, and I've seen people confuse the two, and I'll get into more of that on the next slide. Secondly, training for competition is not the same as training for health. Think of a professional football player. They are training for a very specific goal, to be able to take hits, to be able to run a certain speed. They just have all sorts of goals, and they're not actually perfectly healthy even if they're perfectly fit. And I think that becomes obvious when you take a look at, say, some of the bigger guys, the linemen. They're encouraged to put on weight in a manner that really is not conducive to good health, but it's necessary for them to be able to play that position. A tight end is very lean, but they're going to take a lot of hits. And if somebody has got torn ACLs or bruised ribs, are they really healthy? I mean, I suppose if you had a broken leg and somebody would say, how's your health? You might say, well, I'm relatively healthy. I mean, this broken leg was just something that happened. And I guess how you recover from that broken leg might be an indication of your health. But they are really not the same thing, even though there is a lot of overlap. If you're in a physically fit condition and in competitive shape, yeah, you're probably healthier than a couch potato, but it's not exactly the same thing. Some of the exercises you do for competition are counterproductive to good health, and I'll get into that in the next video. But my key here is, I think preparing for long distance hiking is more of preparing for health as opposed to preparing for competition. Nobody's going to have a stopwatch on you. There's people who go out and try doing the fastest known time of a certain hike. I could care less about any of that. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And then the third rule of thumb is that the best training for the trail is the trail, or as Michael Conti puts it, the trail gets you in shape for the trail. It's not running, it's not biking, it's not walking on bike paths even with a pack on. I happen to use an elliptical trainer. That's not the same as being on the trail. Now, that's not to say that these things are useless. You're probably better off doing these things than not doing anything at all, but you just have to understand the limitations of these kinds of exercises, and just understand that you're going to do what you can in the off season, and the off season to me is any day that I'm not hiking. But it's not going to be the same thing as hiking on the trail. The muscles that you use are just totally different, for example. Okay, so again, like I said, planning is not preparation. Planning, when I say planning, I'm talking about the logistics, the financing, scheduling, the equipment selection, that sort of thing. Whereas when I talk about preparation, I'm talking about getting your body and mind, both are important, getting your body and mind ready to hike. So let's go over the planning topics. Logistics cover such things as, like, what exactly is your hike? My two major hikes this year were a long section hike from Water Gap, Pennsylvania down to Roanoke, Virginia. My other one was to cover the trail miles between Grafton Notch State Park in Maine and Stratton, Maine. And these are both totally different types of hikes. In the case of the Water Gap to Roanoke, I had a start date and an end date, and that was the definition of my hike. When it came to the hike in Maine, well, it was a little more complex. Here's a tip. If you are doing a section hike where you're going to actually drive to the trailhead, try finding a hostel that's somewhere along that path. And if you can get permission to park at the hostel, you can park there, use their shuttle services as they have one, and most of them do, to drop you off at a trailhead, hike back to the hostel. And then have the hostel drop you off at the other end of your hike and hike in the opposite direction back to the hostel. And the reason I recommend doing that as opposed to just starting at the hostel and hiking out to get a pickup is arranging the pickup is much harder. You're kind of forcing yourself either to stay to a schedule or make a call and wait a long time for them to come pick you up. Whereas if you're hiking to the hostel, you get there when you get there. Hopefully they'll, they're usually it's a couple bucks to park, and they usually end up not even charging you for that if you stay overnight. That's the, what is your hike sort of planning. And then how are you going to get there and back? In the case of my section hike from Water Gap, I took the bus to Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and then I walked to the trail because it was close enough to the bus station. And then when I got to Roanoke, I picked up a train and came home. Now, I couldn't actually arrange the train tickets until I was close enough to be absolutely sure that I was going to make it by a certain date, which meant basically a day in advance. Unfortunately, with our smartphones and everything nowadays, you can actually do that. I was actually sitting on a picnic table outside a shelter, and I arranged for my shuttle ride from the trailhead to a hotel. I arranged for the hotel room, and I arranged for the train tickets all on my phone, just sitting there, which is just like a wonderful thing that I didn't used to be able to do. The other thing about logistics is understanding what facilities are there on the way. There are websites that'll tell you all the hostels on the trail. If you've got Gut Hook, which they just renamed themselves as something else. I just got notified recently on it. I forget what the new name is, but their Gut Hook will tell you where all the hostels and shelters and campsites and towns are. And that's going to, help you have an idea of how you're going to resupply and how far you have to go between each resupply. In my case, I go like 50 to 100 miles between resupplies. Usually on the lower side rather than the higher side of that. And then there's the question of, well, how are you going to keep people apprised of where you are and apprised of your status? I have a tracker, as you know, an InReach tracker, and I have to make sure that the subscription is up to date with that. And typically what I'll do is I'll give Darlene a list of all the stopping off places that I might be, so that I can always text her, or she can look on the tracker output to see where I am, to see where I'm staying for the night. And occasionally I do stealth camp, but I can at least say, well, I'm between this point and that point, and she has an idea of where I am. Gives her a peace of mind. Financing. Well, how much does it cost to hike? A figure I see tossed out there a lot is like $1 to $2 per mile, and that's at first seems like a lot. It's like I'm out in the woods walking. Why is it costing me any money to cover a mile? Well, it's an amortized figure. I mean, you take all the money you're going to spend, and it is going to relate loosely to how many miles you put in. You're going to have to buy resupply for food, and food will get you a certain number of miles. It's not like you walk a mile and you pay somebody $2 and you walk another mile, you pay somebody $1. It's not like that, but as you're walking, you're eating trail bars, and that's consuming things that cost money. You'll stop. If you're a hike like me, you may stop at a hostel on occasion, and that's usually $20 to $40 a night to stay at a hostel overnight, and do laundry and that sort of thing. So these things just add up. So $1 to $2 a mile actually is a good rule of thumb average to go by. So then the question comes up, well, how much cash do you bring with you? I bring about 50% of what I think I'm going to spend. A little bit more for shorter trips, actually, a little bit more percentage-wise for shorter trips. On a longer trip, about half of what I'm going to need. But of course, I have a credit card for the other half. I bring a check with me because some hostels would rather have a check than a credit card. Some of them won't accept credit cards. Have a PayPal account or a Venmo account. Those are ways that you can pay. You just never know what you're up against. The problem with credit cards is there's a lot of fees associated with them, and a lot of the smaller businesses just can't take it. And I would recommend, whenever you are at a place that'll take a credit card, by all means use the credit card, whether it's at a Dollar General where you're resupplying or whatever. Because your cash you really want to hold on to in case you get into the situations where only cash will work. Okay, scheduling. You need a time frame for your hike. Certainly, you're not just going to go out, hit the trail, and have no idea when you're going to be done. But you've got to be careful that, the longer the hike, the little more slack you have to have in your schedule. If you're going for a day hike, obviously done in a day. If you're going on like a longer section hike like I did like a quarter of the Appalachian Trail on a single hike. A lot of people do the whole thing on a single hike. And I had no idea how long it was going to take. I shouldn't have no idea. I had some idea it was going to take between 35 and 45 days. And there were points where it looked like it was going to be 35 days, but it turned out to be 41 days, I think, is what it took me to do that. And that was with a couple 0 days in there. You do have to have plans for what you're going to do if you're lagging, you're unable to finish. If I was unable to finish, Darlene kept on telling me, don't be afraid to stop early if you're just not making it, and come home early. The problem was I really didn't have a good escape. If I didn't make it to Roanoke, I didn't really have a good place to stop. Maybe Charlottesville, I might have been able to pick up a train there if I could have gotten to Charlottesville from the trail, which actually I know somebody who lived in the area, my high school track coach, and I might have been able to arrange that. In what would cause you to be unable to finish? Well, maybe you're going too slow and you do have a hard stop, a day you have to be done by. I actually injured both of my ankles within a few hours of each other, which may sound like exceptionally bad luck, but it's almost like one leads to the other. I twisted an ankle, and when you twist an ankle, you start favoring that ankle, of course, and that puts extra stress on your other ankle. So it's not, not unusual that you would twist one ankle and then end up doing the other one a short while after that because you just added the stress to that ankle. I was fortunate. At that point, I thought I was going to be done in 35 days. I did take a couple days off and I slowed down a bit. I ended up, like I said, taking 41 days to finish that hike. And I was able to do that because I did have enough slack in my schedule. Being retired, I didn't really have a hard and fast stop other than I couldn't stay out there forever, obviously. So things not going as planned, by the way, are just a fact of life. When I went on my main part of the hike, from Grafton Notch up to Stratton, Maine, that took 2 attempts because somebody in my party got sick and we had to bail out early, and I had to go up there again and finish it. And then you have to consider, how often are you going to resupply? Like I said, I did everything from between 50 and 100 miles, usually closer to 60 to 75 miles. And a real important point is don't overschedule. And by overschedule, I mean don't put too much detail in your schedule. You don't know where you're going to be by a certain time. It actually makes your hike less enjoyable if you're trying to stick to a strict schedule. Enjoy yourself while you're out there. Just knowing that I had plenty of leeway in my schedule, that I was going to be finished any time between August 3rd and August 15th was actually very nice because I could make decisions. I want to take a 0 at this particular hostel because it's nice. I want to take the side trail because I hear there's a good view up there. I'm going to stop early because this campsite is really nice and it's a national park campsite that's got a camp store and a laundry with it. I was able to do all those things. So if you overschedule and you think that you know how far you're going to go on another day, you're probably going to get shocked when you get out there. Equipment selection. A lot of people have a checklist and they say, this is my checklist for my hike and this is what I'm going to bring with me. I actually take a similar but different approach. I have a checklist of everything that I own, and I go through it before every hike so that I'm actually thinking about what I want for this particular hike, because every hike is different. Hiking in the southwestern United States and the Grand Canyon or something like that is very different than hiking on the Appalachian Trail. But if I look at every piece of equipment on my checklist, I'm making a conscious decision. Do I include this or do I not? The pocket shower that I talked about in my water equipment series is a great example. I wouldn't bring that on the Appalachian Trail. I would bring that with me in the Grand Canyon. So that way I don't forget anything because I am at least considering every single thing. Some things are easy. Yeah, I know I'm not going to bring it. Some things, I'll actually have to think about and make some kind of trade-off decision. So that's the planning aspects. Brief as it is, I mean, you'll be thinking about it a lot more than just a few minutes of this video. But when I get back, I also do a lessons learned. I have a big lessons learned database. You can see it here. It is, 199 items on it right now. I always say that there's no point in making mistakes if you're not going to learn from them. Or that's how I usually say, if you're not going to learn from your mistakes, there's no point in making them in the first place. I guess that's the way I usually word it. This is kind of like the closing parentheses, the opposite of planning. When you're done your hike, you're actually kind of planning for the next hike already by looking at the things that you learned on that trip, either from suggestions from other hikers or just things you figured out on your own as you're going. Or even just an observation like how many trail bars get you through a day of hiking or something like that. So that's what I do. I put together these lessons learned, and then I didn't talk about this in planning, but I actually will review them at the beginning before I go into the planning for each hike, just to make sure it's fresh in my mind and that I don't go making the mistakes a second time. So that's all I've got on planning. In the next video, I'll talk about the physical preparation, the exercise and conditioning.